Hey guys, tonight we are going on the longest journey imaginable. We're going to travel back across the entire history of our species, back to the very moment our story begins. You're standing not on a frozen tundra, but under the immense, hot sky of an African savanna. The air shimmers with heat, and you can smell the dry grass and the rich, dusty earth. In the distance, a herd of giant, long-horned buffalo moves like a slow river. You look into the eyes of a person standing beside you, and in those eyes, you see a flash of recognition, a familiar intelligence. But their world, their mind, is in some fundamental way alien to yours. This is the story of Homo Sapiens, and the great mystery of why it took us so long to become us. Be warned, you probably wouldn't survive this. Not because of the lions or the hyenas, but because of the sheer crushing loneliness of a world without Wi-Fi. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. It's a little before 9 a.m. on a Friday here in Ho Chi Minh City, and the day is already warm. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. To begin this story, you first have to erase the image that probably lives in your head, the famous March of Progress illustration. You know the one, a stooped, ape-like creature on the far left, gradually standing more upright through a series of intermediate figures until you have the proud, spear-wielding, anatomically modern human on the far right. It's a powerful, clean, and satisfying story of a linear, triumphant ascent. It is also completely wrong. The story of our origins is not a straight line. It is not a ladder of progress. It is a messy, complicated, and far more interesting story of a slow, gradual emergence from a tangled family tree. Let's set the scene. The time is roughly 300,000 years ago. The place is Africa, but it's not a single place, not a specific Garden of Eden from which we all emerged. Instead, you have to imagine the entire continent as a vast laboratory for human evolution. The climate is unstable, shifting between periods of lush greenery and periods of intense drought. As the environment changes, populations of early humans are separated from each other for thousands of years, isolated in different ecological refuges. A lush river valley here, a highland forest there. In this isolation, they begin to evolve in slightly different directions. This is the heart of the modern understanding of our origins. We did not spring from a single ancestral population. Instead, we arose from what scientists now call a braided ancestry. Think of it not like a tree with a single trunk, but more like a great river delta. Many different streams of archaic human populations meandered across the African continent. Sometimes these streams would flow apart, diverging and developing their own unique sets of traits. At other times, when the climate improved and the deserts turned to grasslands again, these streams would flow back together, merging and mixing their genes. Our species, Homo Sapiens, was forged in this process of separation and remixing. The famous skulls found at Jebel Irhoud in Morocco are a perfect snapshot of this process. Dated to around 315,000 years ago, they have faces that look remarkably modern. You could pass one on the street today. But their brain cases are long and low, more archaic in shape than our own high, domed skulls. They are one stream in the river, an early version of Sapiens, but not yet the final form. For hundreds of thousands of years, Africa was home to a variety of these almost us populations. And what were these first members of our species doing? They were surviving. They were competent, clever, tool-using hominins. You watch them in their daily lives. They live in small, mobile bands. They hunt, using heavy thrusting spears with fire-hardened wooden tips or simple stone points. They control fire, using it for warmth, for cooking, and for keeping predators at bay. They have a toolkit of stone implements, hand axes, scrapers, choppers, that are effective, but which remain largely unchanged in their basic design for immense stretches of time. They are successful. They are intelligent. But as you look closer at their world, you are struck by a profound and haunting absence. There is nothing here that we would recognize as art. There are no beads, no pendants, no personal ornaments of any kind. There are no carved figurines. No one is decorating their tools with abstract patterns. There are no paintings on the walls of their rock shelters. They do not seem to be burying their dead with any form of ritual or grave goods. For the first two-thirds of our species' existence, from roughly 300,000 years ago down to about 100,000 years ago, our ancestors left behind virtually no evidence of a symbolic life. This is the great paradox. You are looking at people with bodies like ours, and crucially, brains the size of ours. If you were to hold the skull of one of these early sapiens in your hands, you would find it has the same cranial capacity as a person living today. And yet, for 200,000 years, a span of time nearly 40 times longer than all of recorded history, our species' primary creative output appears to have been well-made rocks. This long, silent period is the central mystery we are exploring tonight. Why did anatomically modern humans exist for so long before they started behaving like modern humans? The question is, what was missing? Was there some fundamental cognitive piece that hadn't yet clicked into place? Or was the hardware all there, but the social and demographic software hadn't been installed yet? The central puzzle of the Middle Paleolithic is what archaeologists call the sapient paradox. Why did anatomically modern humans, with modern-sized brains, exist for so long before the explosion of behavioral modernity? The debate rages between those who posit a late, sudden cognitive change, perhaps a genetic mutation that hardwired our brains for complex language, and those who argue for a more gradual process, one driven not by a change in our brains, but by changes in our social and environmental worlds. Let's lean into the speculative side for a moment. Perhaps their minds simply worked differently. It's a fringe idea, but a thought-provoking one, to consider that consciousness as we experience it, a constant internal monologue, a narrative I that is always thinking about the past and future, is itself a recent cultural invention. Perhaps the minds of these early humans were quieter, more present-focused, less given to the kind of internal reflection that seems to fuel the creation of external symbols. Maybe they had the capacity for art and religion, but simply didn't feel the need for it. Their world was what it was. It didn't need to be represented or reinterpreted through symbols. It's almost impossible for us to imagine. It's about 9 a.m. on a Friday here. By this time of day, you and I have already processed thousands of symbols, corporate logos, traffic signs, the letters on this screen, the emojis in a text message. Our world is a dense forest of symbols. To imagine a human mind existing in a world almost completely devoid of them is to imagine a different kind of consciousness. Or maybe the reason is more practical. Perhaps they simply weren't very good at interior decorating. Paint the cave walls? That's so much work. And what if we want to move camp next season? The resale value on decorated caves is just terrible these days. Joking aside, the absence is truly profound. We have their bones, which tell us they were us. We have their tools, which tell us they were skilled. But we have none of the things that we instinctively feel make us human. No art, no music, no jewelry, no ceremony. So you are left with this picture of our earliest ancestors, a physically modern people, intelligent and adaptable, slowly spreading across the African continent. They are masters of their environment, competent hunters and tool makers. But they are a species without symbols, a culture without art. They are a people living in a long, quiet dawn, their minds filled with the practical knowledge of survival, but their world seemingly empty of externalized meaning. This is not a story of a triumphant, sudden arrival on the world stage. It is a story of a slow, drawn-out beginning, of a species existing in a state of potential for a span of time that is nearly impossible for us to grasp. They are a creature poised on a great threshold, but for 200,000 years, they do not seem to cross it. The key to understanding this long stasis, this period of technological competence but symbolic silence, may not lie inside their skulls. It may lie in the simple, brutal mathematics of their population. The reason they couldn't build a complex symbolic culture might be because, for most of their history, there simply weren't enough of them. You are standing in a world that is, for all its wildness, profoundly empty of people. For the vast majority of our 300,000-year history, the total global population of Homo sapiens was infinitesimally small. The best estimates suggest that for long stretches of time, there were likely fewer than 10,000 breeding individuals on the entire planet. That's not the population of a small town. That's the population of a large high school. All the humans in the world could have fit comfortably inside a modern football stadium with plenty of room for stretching. Now, imagine that tiny population scattered across the immense continent of Africa. The distances between groups are vast. Your own band might consist of 20, maybe 30 individuals. You might meet up with a few other bands once a year at a seasonal hunting ground, forming a temporary supergroup of 100 or so people to trade stories, tools, and potential marriage partners. But for the most part, your world is your small, immediate family group. The chances of you meeting a total stranger in your entire lifetime are practically zero. This low population density, this profound social and genetic isolation, is the critical variable that solves the sapient paradox. The reason for the long, 200,000-year period of cultural stagnation was not a flaw in our brains. It was a problem of mathematics. There simply weren't enough of us. To understand why, you need to think of culture not as a static thing, but as a pool of information, a body of knowledge about how to make tools, find food, and understand the world. This pool of knowledge is held in the collective memory of the group. For culture to grow and become more complex, you need to be adding new ideas, innovations, to the pool faster than old ideas are lost. You need to be pouring water into a bucket faster than it's leaking out. For early modern humans, the problem was that their cultural bucket was incredibly leaky. This leakage is a process that scientists call cultural drift. It's the loss of skills and knowledge over time due to random chance, a phenomenon that is especially powerful in very small populations. All of your group's knowledge, remember, is stored in the fragile brains of its members. There are no books, no hard drives, no YouTube tutorials. Let's imagine that in your small band, there is only one person, let's call her Mara, who has truly mastered the difficult art of making a particular type of hafted spear point. She is a genius, a master craftswoman. She might try to teach her skill to a couple of apprentices, but the skill is complex and takes years to perfect. Then one day, Mara is killed in a hunting accident or dies from a sudden illness. Her two apprentices, who hadn't yet fully mastered the technique, try to carry it on, but their versions are not as good. The quality declines, or perhaps Mara dies before she has a chance to pass the skill on at all. In a tiny, isolated group of 30 people, the death of a single skilled individual can mean the complete and permanent extinction of a technology. The knowledge is just gone. It's like having the only person in the world who knows the Wi-Fi password get eaten by a lion. That critical piece of information has vanished from the network forever. We have a powerful real-world example of this process. When sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, the island of Tasmania was cut off from mainland Australia. The small human population of a few thousand individuals was left in complete isolation for the next 10,000 years. And the archaeological record shows something remarkable. Over that time, the Tasmanian people actually lost a whole suite of useful technologies that their ancestors had possessed. They stopped making bone tools. They lost the ability to make sewn, cold-weather clothing. Most astonishingly, they stopped eating fish, even though they were surrounded by the ocean. Their population was simply not large enough or interconnected enough to maintain this level of cultural complexity. Skills that were not essential for immediate survival, or were only known by a few specialists, were gradually lost to the relentless process of cultural drift. The bucket was leaking faster than they could pour new ideas into it. This is the world you inhabit. It's a world of flickering innovations. A brilliant idea might arise in one group. Someone like Mara invents her new spear point, and for a generation, your band has a distinct advantage. But because your group rarely interacts with others, the idea doesn't spread. It is quarantined by geography, and because your group is so small, it is constantly at risk of being lost. A bad winter, a disease, a series of accidents. If your group's numbers fall too low, the cultural loss is catastrophic. A significant portion of your collective knowledge can be wiped out in a single season. This creates a frustrating pattern of one step forward, one step back. There is no steady, cumulative accumulation of culture. Progress is not a ladder you are climbing. It is a series of temporary sparks of brilliance that appear for a time in a certain place, only to wink out again in the vast darkness of history. Archaeologists see this pattern in the stone tool record of the African Middle Stone Age. In one rock shelter, you might find a layer containing beautifully made, highly complex tools, but the layers above and below it contain only simpler, more basic implements. This flickering pattern is the signature of a low-density population struggling to hang on to its own best ideas. There is a fascinating debate among archaeologists about this. Do these flickering innovations represent a failure of cultural transmission due to low population density? Or do they reflect something else? A strategic flexibility where early humans would develop and use complex technologies when they needed them for a specific environment, and then happily discard them when they moved to a new place where those tools were no longer necessary. It's a debate between seeing our ancestors as victims of demographic circumstance or as pragmatic minimalists, unburdened by the need to hang on to useless knowledge. The truth is likely a combination of both. The irony is that you have the cognitive hardware to handle so much more. The social brain hypothesis, most famously associated with anthropologist Robin Dunbar, suggests that the large size of the primate brain evolved primarily to manage complex social relationships. Dunbar's research suggests a cognitive limit for humans of around 150 stable relationships, the famous Dunbar's number. Your brain is built to handle a network of 150 people. But in your daily life, your network might only be 30. You have all this excess social processing power, this latent capacity for a larger, more complex society, but the demographic reality of your world doesn't allow you to use it. It is a brain built for a city, living in a world of tiny, scattered villages. It's 8:52 a.m. on a Friday here. In the last hour, thanks to the internet, I have absorbed information from dozens, if not hundreds, of different minds from all over the world. If I discovered a new idea right now, I could transmit it to millions of people in seconds. For you, transmitting a new idea to even 50 other people might be the project of a lifetime, requiring a journey of hundreds of kilometers and a rare, auspicious gathering of the clans. Your ability to innovate is not limited by your intelligence, but by your bandwidth. So you live in this state of perpetual cultural churn. Good ideas come and go. It's like inventing the world's greatest recipe for mammoth stew. A recipe so good it could change the culinary world, but you only write it down on a single leaf, and then a gust of wind blows the leaf into the fire. The recipe, and the gastronomic revolution it might have sparked, is lost to history forever. This, then, is the solution to the long silence. For 200,000 years, our species was not dumb or uncreative. We were simply too few and too far between. Our collective brain, the network of all human minds, was not dense enough to build upon itself. It was constantly forgetting. Culture was a leaky bucket. Before we could develop the externalized memory systems of art, symbols, and writing, we first needed to solve this fundamental problem of connection. We needed more people. But even within this world of flickering progress, your people were capable of incredible craftsmanship. You managed to develop and, crucially, maintain a sophisticated toolkit that allowed you to be the planet's most formidable predator. Next, we will look closely at the beautiful and deadly tools you did make, evidence of your skillful hands, but also a testament to a world still waiting for its symbolic dawn. The great, leaky bucket of early human culture explains why progress was not a steady, upward march. For 200,000 years, your ancestors were caught in a frustrating cycle of innovation and loss, their best ideas constantly threatening to evaporate into the mists of time. But this does not mean their world was technologically stagnant. Within this challenging demographic reality, they managed to develop and, crucially, to maintain a toolkit of remarkable sophistication. They were not just surviving, they were masters of their craft. It is in their hands, not yet in their art, that we see the first true flourishing of the modern human mind. Let's travel to a place that gives us a window into this world. Imagine you are at a place called Katupan, in the arid heart of modern South Africa. Today it is part of the Kalahari Desert, but hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was a lush, wet environment centered around a large, productive waterhole that drew animals and early humans alike. Digging down through the layers of sediment, archaeologists have found a treasure trove of stone tools, and among them are some of the earliest and most compelling pieces of evidence for a major technological leap. Stone points designed to be hafted onto the end of spears. This find, and others like it, shows that by at least 250,000 years ago, your ancestors had perfected the art of the composite hunting weapon. This is a monumental achievement. A simple, sharpened stick is one thing, but creating a stone-tipped spear is a multi-stage process that requires planning, skill, and a deep understanding of different materials. This technology represents a stable platform of knowledge that was so vital to survival. It managed to resist the constant leakage of cultural drift. While other, less critical skills might have flickered in and out of existence, the knowledge of how to make a lethal, reliable spear was guarded, practiced, and passed down with the utmost care from one generation to the next. Let's look closely at one of these spear points. Hold it in your hand. It is not a crude, jagged rock. It is a thing of lethal elegance. The first thing you notice is its symmetry. It might be leaf-shaped or a perfect, sharp triangle. This is not just for looks. A mind focused on pure survival knows that a symmetrical object is a balanced object. A balanced point makes for a more stable, more accurate spear, one that won't veer off course when thrown. This is a practical application of the principles of aerodynamics. This is the difference between a clumsy amateur and a master craftsman. My attempt at making a spear point would probably look like a slightly angry potato. Yours is something an engineer would admire. You turn the point over in your hand and notice how the base, the part that would be attached to the wooden shaft, is different from the tip. It has been deliberately thinned and shaped, perhaps with small notches on the side. This is the hafting element. The person who made this was not just thinking about the stone component. They were thinking about the entire weapon system. They were visualizing how this point would fit snugly into a split wooden shaft, how sinew bindings would wrap around it, how adhesive would hold it firm. This is complex, sequential thinking. Then you look at the edges. They are incredibly sharp, honed by a technique called pressure flaking. After the rough shape of the point was achieved by striking it with an antler hammer, the maker would take a pointed tool, perhaps the tip of an antler or a piece of hard bone, and use it to press firmly against the edge of the stone. With a precise application of pressure, tiny, fine flakes would pop off, allowing for an incredible degree of control in shaping and sharpening the final edge. This is meticulous finishing work, requiring immense patience and a delicate touch. The result is an object that is perfectly designed for its purpose. It is a masterpiece of functional design, and for 250,000 years, this was the pinnacle of your people's expression. You had the intelligence, the fine motor control, the patience, and the forward planning to turn a rough rock into a perfect, symmetrical, deadly work of practical art. You could do all of this, but here's the profound mystery. You never took the next step. As you examine the spear point, you notice what isn't there. There are no engravings. There are no abstract patterns, no zigzags or spirals decorating its surface. There is no mark to indicate who made it, or which clan they belonged. The object is beautiful, but its beauty derives entirely from its perfect function. It is a world without decoration, a world of skillful hands, but silent minds, or at least minds that did not feel the need to express themselves in any lasting, symbolic way. This is the great, persistent silence. Why? Why? For 1,000 generations, did people with the ability to create such controlled and beautiful forms never use that skill to create a non-functional image? Why did they never scratch the image of the bison they were about to hunt onto the spear they would hunt it with? The debate over the meaning, of symmetry in these Middle Paleolithic tools is ongoing among archaeologists. Some researchers argue that the high degree of symmetry, which often exceeds purely functional requirements, is itself a kind of proto-art, the first stirring of an aesthetic sense. They argue that making something beautiful, even if it's a tool, is a symbolic act. Others maintain that it is purely a byproduct of a highly skilled manufacturing process and an obsessive focus on performance. A perfectly symmetrical tool is simply a tool that works better, and any beauty we see in it is a modern projection. The most likely answer to this puzzle brings us back to the stark reality of your demographic situation. With a global population of breeding individuals numbering below 10,000, your social world is incredibly small. A shared symbolic system, a set of marks and images that everyone in a culture agrees have a certain meaning, is only useful if you have a large enough audience to share it with. Symbols are a form of social communication. They say things like, "I belong to this group," or "This object is sacred," or "This story is important." But in your world, you don't need a symbol to show you belong to your group. Everyone already knows who you are. You don't need to communicate your identity to a stranger, because you will never meet one. Your spear point has one job: to efficiently kill a gazelle. It doesn't need to broadcast a social message. It's as if your entire culture subscribed to the most severe form of minimalist design. If a feature doesn't improve function, it is extraneous and unnecessary. So, for this immense stretch of time, your world is one of how, but not why. Your mental energy is focused on the immediate, practical problems of existence. How do I make the sharpest point? How do I find water? How do I track this animal? The bigger questions that fuel symbolic culture. Why are we here? What happens when we die? What is the nature of the cosmos? Were either not being asked, or they were being answered through impermanent means like stories and songs, which left no trace in the archaeological record. Perhaps the cognitive bias of functional fixedness was at play. A spear point was a spear point. Its function was so overwhelmingly important that it was never seen as a potential canvas for something else. It's 8:53 a.m. on this Friday morning in Ho Chi Minh City. As I sit here, my coffee mug has a logo on it. The pen I'm holding has a brand name stamped on it. My computer screen is a constellation of icons, each a tiny symbol representing a complex function. We are saturated in a world where meaning is constantly layered onto functional objects. You, by contrast, live in a world of pure utility, where an object's meaning is its function. It's a much cleaner, though perhaps a less mentally cluttered, existence. This long period of technological maturity, paired with symbolic silence, defines our species for the majority of its time on Earth. You are a master of stone, a brilliant practical engineer, a successful hunter. You have solved the how of survival, but you have not yet begun to record the why. And even these hard-won technical skills were fragile. As we are about to see, your people would go on to make other ingenious, clever inventions. But the unstable world you lived in, a world of dramatic and repeated climate change, would often act as a great reset button, ensuring that even your best ideas were frequently lost to the winds of time. The world of your ancestors, for all its demographic challenges, was not intellectually barren. The same mind that could conceive of and execute a perfect, symmetrical spear point was constantly at work, solving the other, less dramatic, but equally important problems of daily life. Even as the leaky bucket of culture caused many skills to be lost, new ones were always being invented. Your people were ingenious, but they were ingenious in a world that was, to put it mildly, incooperative. They were not just fighting against the mathematics of small populations. They were fighting against the planet itself. Let's step away from the big game hunting tools and look at the quieter, cleverer inventions that made life more comfortable and secure. You are in a place like Deep Kloof Rock Shelter in what is now South Africa's Western Cape. The environment is arid, and water is precious. Transporting water is a major logistical problem. You can't just cup it in your hands. A leather bag might leak or taint the taste. So, what do? You find a solution in the natural world around you. You hunt an ostrich. After feasting on the massive egg, you don't discard the shell. You see it for what it is, a perfect, natural ceramic. It is lightweight, durable, and holds a large volume of liquid. With a small stone tool, you carefully punch a hole in one end. You have just invented the canteen. You can now carry a day's worth of water with you as you travel away from the river, dramatically expanding your foraging range. This isn't a simple act. It requires forethought, planning, and the cognitive leap of seeing an object not just for what it is, food, but for what it could become, a tool. At Deep Kloof, archaeologists have found fragments of these eggshell flasks dating back 60,000 years. Or travel to another site, Border Cave, also in South Africa. Here, you have prepared a bed for your family. You've laid down a base layer of ash from the hearth. You know from experience that this creates a clean, dry foundation that insulates from the damp ground and keeps crawling insects away. But you've done something else. The top layer of your bedding, the part you actually sleep on, is made from bundles of grass from a specific plant, the camphor bush. You chose this plant for a reason. When crushed, its leaves release a strong, aromatic scent. You know that this scent repels mosquitoes and other biting insects. You have engineered a pest-free sleeping environment using basic pharmacology. You are practicing a form of preventative medicine, creating a more hygienic and comfortable space that reduces the risk of insect-borne illness for you and your children. These are just two examples of the countless small, brilliant innovations that would have flickered into existence across the ancient world. A new way to weave a basket, a better method for detoxifying a plant food, a new kind of snare. The problem was that these clever ideas were blooming in a garden that was about to be hit by a frost. The greatest antagonist in the story of early human culture was not a predator or a rival tribe. It was the climate. We tend to think of the Ice Age as one long, continuous period of cold. But the reality, as revealed by high-resolution ice core samples from Greenland and deep-sea sediment cores, is that the Pleistocene epoch was a time of breathtakingly violent and rapid climate swings. The planet's thermostat was broken. These were not slow, gradual changes over millennia. The climate could flip dramatically in the space of a few decades, sometimes even a single human lifetime. Scientists have names for these events, like Dansgaard-Eschger cycles and Heinrich events. A period of relative warmth and stability, like the one your canteen-inventing ancestors were enjoying, could suddenly end. In the North Atlantic, great armadas of icebergs would break off from the glaciers, flooding the ocean with fresh water and disrupting the currents that carried heat around the globe. Temperatures would plummet, the rains would stop, the lush savanna would turn to arid desert, the forests would retreat, the entire ecological system upon which your people depended would be thrown into chaos. For a small human population, such a shift would be catastrophic. The herds of animals you relied upon would either migrate away or die off. The plants you gathered would wither and vanish. The river would dry up. Your entire way of life, your deep, intimate knowledge of that specific landscape would become useless overnight. Your group would face a stark choice: move or die. This is the Great Reset button. It's hard for us, living in the Holocene, the remarkably stable and warm period of the last 11,000 years, to appreciate just how turbulent their world was. It's a little after 8:54 a.m. here in Ho Chi Minh City. The weather today will be hot and humid, just like yesterday, and just like it will be tomorrow. We plan our lives around a fundamental assumption of environmental stability. For your ancestors, there was no such luxury. The 5-day forecast would have just been a shrug. This cycle of climate instability provides the final, crucial piece of the puzzle of the long stasis. The leaky bucket of culture was not just leaking on its own. The entire planet would periodically stride over and kick the bucket over. Imagine your group has spent generations in a particular valley. You have perfected the art of hunting the local antelope. You know every plant, every water source. You invent eggshell canteens because water is scarce. You are thriving. Then, a rapid climate shift occurs. The rains fail completely. The antelope leave. Your valley becomes an uninhabitable dust bowl. Your small band is forced to migrate, to travel hundreds of kilometers into an unknown territory. Many of your old skills are now obsolete. Your intimate mental map is useless. Your knowledge of the local plants is irrelevant. In the new, wetter environment you find, there are no ostriches, so the technology of the eggshell canteen is forgotten within a generation. Your population has likely crashed during the hard times, meaning many of your skilled elders and their libraries of memory have been lost. You are now focused on the absolute basics of survival in a new place. Your cultural toolkit has been reset. You have to start again. This is the cycle of forgetting writ large across the entire globe. It perfectly explains the flickering pattern we see in the archaeological record. A clever innovation appears in a specific place at a specific time during a favorable climate window, and then it vanishes as that window closes. It's not that the people became less intelligent. It's that their world was literally pulled out from under them over and over again. It's the planetary equivalent of writing a masterpiece novel and then having your computer crash, wiping the hard drive clean before you could save or back it up. All that work, all that creativity is gone. The debate among archaeologists continues. Did climate change directly cause these cultural losses by causing populations to crash? Or did it act as a creative spur, forcing people to invent new ways to survive? The answer is almost certainly both. It was a relentless cycle of crisis and response, of innovation and collapse. The Toba supereruption in Sumatra around 74,000 years ago is the ultimate, though still debated, example of such a global reset button. The theory suggests it triggered a volcanic winter that lasted for years, decimating plant and animal life and pushing human populations to the very edge of extinction. Any group that survived such an event would have emerged into a changed world. Their cultural traditions shattered, their numbers decimated, forced to begin again with only their most fundamental survival skills intact. So you see the trap your ancestors were in. Their own low numbers made it hard to retain knowledge, and the planet's unstable climate made it almost impossible to build any long-term cultural momentum. They were brilliant survivors, clever inventors, and masters of their immediate environment. But they were trapped on a treadmill, running as fast as they could just to stay in the same place. Their world was a world of eternal beginnings, of promising sparks constantly being extinguished by the next wave of drought or ice. Before the great awakening of art and symbols could happen, something would have to change. Either the planet would have to stabilize, or your people would have to find a way to overcome the tyranny of their own small numbers. And as we will see, the immense stress of these climate catastrophes, while devastating, may have also planted the seeds for the very changes that would ultimately allow our species to break free. Your ancestors were clever. Their hands were skilled, but they were trapped on a planetary treadmill of progress and collapse. Their small numbers made it difficult to retain knowledge, and the planet's volatile climate kept kicking over their cultural bucket. And between roughly 135,000 and 70,000 years ago, the climate didn't just kick the bucket over. It threatened to smash it to pieces. This was a time of trials, an epic of environmental catastrophes so severe that they pushed our fledgling species to the very brink of extinction and left a permanent scar on our collective DNA. You are living through one of the planet's great mood swings. The world is plunging into a deep glacial period. In the north, the ice sheets are advancing, locking up vast quantities of the world's water. The effect in your homeland of Africa is not a world of ice, but a world of drought. A mega drought on a scale that beggars the modern imagination. The monsoon rains that nourish the continent fail, not just for a season or two, but for thousands of years. You watch as your world dries up. The lush savannas, teeming with herds of game, wither and turn to dust. The great lakes that were once the size of inland seas shrink, their shorelines receding by kilometers until they become nothing more than vast, glittering salt pans. The deserts of the Sahara in the north and the Kalahari in the south expand, their sand seas swallowing up formerly fertile land and splitting the continent into isolated pockets. The river that your people have followed for generations becomes a trickle, then a series of stagnant, muddy pools, and then nothing. The world, as you know it, is dying. The vast majority of the human population dies with it. The habitable zones shrink, and your people are forced into tiny, isolated pockets where life is still possible. These places are called refugia. Perhaps it's a small strip of coastline where sea fogs provide a little moisture. Perhaps it's a high-altitude mountain forest that still catches some rain. Perhaps it's a single river valley fed by a permanent spring. Outside of these tiny oases of life, the world is a barren wasteland. Your species, once spread thinly across a continent, has been reduced to a handful of scattered, desperate bands, each completely cut off from the others. You are living through a slow-motion apocalypse. It's the ultimate downsizing. Your entire species goes from a continent-wide distribution to a few scattered studio apartments with a partial view of the last remaining puddle. This demographic collapse had a profound and permanent effect on our species, one that we can still read in our genes today. The event is known as a genetic bottleneck. When a population is drastically reduced in size, its genetic diversity is also drastically reduced. The few survivors carry only a small, random sample of the genetic variation that was present in the original, larger population. And when this small group of survivors eventually repopulates, all their descendants will be built from that much smaller genetic toolkit. This is the reason that you, sitting here right now, are, genetically speaking, remarkably similar to every other human on Earth. Our species has famously low genetic diversity compared to our closest living relatives, the other great apes. The genetic differences between two chimpanzee populations living in different parts of Africa can be far greater than the genetic differences between a person from Helsinki and a person from Tierra del Fuego. This is the genetic scar left by the bottlenecks of the deep past. It is proof, written in our own DNA, that our ancestors came terrifyingly close to vanishing forever. We are all the descendants of a small handful of survivors. For the people living through this, the cultural effects would have been just as devastating. All contact between groups would have ceased. The annual gatherings to trade tools, stories, and partners would be a distant memory. The leaky bucket of culture would become a sieve. Each tiny, isolated refugium would be on its own, a lonely island of humanity. Their cultural traditions would drift apart, and their library of memory would shrink, retaining only the knowledge absolutely essential for survival in their specific microenvironment. It was a great forgetting, and as if the mega droughts weren't enough, the planet may have had one more cataclysm in store. Around 74,000 years ago, a volcano in Sumatra called Toba exploded. This wasn't just any eruption. It was a super eruption, the largest volcanic event in the last 2 million years. It blasted a colossal cloud of ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, an aerosol blanket that would have wrapped around the entire globe. The hypothetical effects are terrifying. This blanket would have blocked out a significant portion of sunlight, potentially for years. Global temperatures would have plummeted, triggering a volcanic winter. The effect on a planet already in the grip of an ice age would have been devastating. Plant life would have withered in the dim, cold conditions. Animal populations, and the humans who depended on them, would have crashed. For a species already on the ropes, clinging to survival and a few scattered refugia, the Toba catastrophe could have been the final blow. First the mega droughts, then a supervolcano blots out the sun for a half-dozen years. At this point, you'd be forgiven for thinking the universe just really had it in for you. Now, it's important to say that the Toba catastrophe theory is highly controversial. The eruption is a geological fact, but its exact impact on human populations is fiercely debated. Some archaeological evidence, particularly from sites in India and even South Africa, seems to show that human groups lived through the Toba ash layer without any major disruption to their toolkits or lifeways. This suggests that while the eruption was enormous, its global impact may have been less apocalyptic than the most dramatic theories propose. The survivors may have been tougher and more resilient than we give them credit for. But whether the bottlenecks were caused by a long, slow squeeze from drought or a short, sharp shock from a volcano, the result was the same. By around 70,000 years ago, our species had been through a crucible. We had been reduced to a tiny, fragmented population, pushed to the very edge of annihilation. The survivors were the toughest, the most adaptable, the most ingenious, and perhaps the most cooperative of their kind. They had endured the worst the planet could throw at them. It's 8:55 a.m. on a Friday here in Ho Chi Minh City. The morning rush hour traffic is probably at its peak, a familiar kind of daily stress. But it is a stress born of density, of success. It is nothing compared to the stress of your entire species numbering less than a small town, with a multi-year volcanic winter on the 5-day forecast. As the climate slowly, mercifully, began to improve after 70,000 years ago, the world started to become green and wet again. The deserts retreated, the Great Lakes began to fill, and from their isolated refugia, the small bands of human survivors began to expand once more. They emerged from their long isolation and began to repopulate the empty landscapes. But these were not the same people who had entered the time of trials. They had been changed. They had been forged in the fire of near extinction. And as they emerged, they carried something new with them. Perhaps the intense pressure of the bottleneck selected for even greater cognitive flexibility and cooperation. Perhaps the long isolation allowed new cultural ideas to incubate. Whatever the reason, something is different. The long, 200,000-year silence is finally about to be broken. On a storm-lashed coast at the southern tip of Africa, in a cave overlooking the Indian Ocean, one of these survivors is about to pick up a piece of soft, red stone, a piece of ochre, and do something that none of their ancestors, for 1,000 generations, had ever done before. They are about to carve a message. They are about to make the first known abstract symbol. The spark of modernity is about to be struck. Your species has survived. You have been through the fire of a planetary climate crisis, squeezed through a genetic bottleneck that brought you to the edge of annihilation. You are one of the survivors, emerging from a long, desperate isolation into a world that is slowly beginning to heal. And something within you has changed. The intense pressure of the last few thousand years has acted as a crucible, forging a new kind of mind, or perhaps awakening a capacity that has lain dormant for millennia. The long silence is about to be broken. The first word in the story of human art is about to be written, not in ink, but in stone. Your journey takes you to the southern coast of South Africa, to a place that in the distant future will be called Blombo's Cave. You are standing at the mouth of a sea cave, looking out over the crashing waves of the Indian Ocean. This stretch of coast was one of those precious refugia, a place where a rich marine ecosystem provided a reliable source of food even when the inland savannas had turned to dust. The people who lived here survived the worst of the mega droughts, their population clinging to this narrow, productive strip of land. Inside the cave, the scene is familiar. You see the remains of ancient hearths, the scatter of animal bones from countless meals, the discarded stone tools of daily life. The people here were making beautiful and highly effective spear points, the kind archaeologists will one day call stillbay points, crafted from stone that had been carefully treated in the fire to make it easier to flake. But as you look closer at the debris on the cave floor, you see things that are different, things that hint at a profound shift in the way your people are thinking and behaving. You see a huge quantity of ochre, that soft red and yellow stone. They are not just using it, they are processing it on an almost industrial scale, grinding it into fine, rich pigments. Something new is happening here. And then, an archaeologist of the future, a man named Christopher Henshill Wood, finds it. It is an object so small and unassuming that it could easily be missed. It is a small, flattened piece of red ochre, no bigger than your thumb. It has been scraped and ground smooth on its two main faces. And on one of those faces, someone 75,000 years ago carved a pattern. You lean in closer to see. It is not a picture of a person or an animal. It is a purely abstract design. A series of diagonal lines have been carefully incised, creating a cross-hatched, diamond-like pattern. This pattern is then framed by two parallel lines, with a third line running down the center. This is not an accident. These are not the random scratches of a butcher's knife or the marks from scraping the ochre for powder. This is a deliberate, structured, repeating pattern. It is a symbol. This small, red rock is one of the most important objects in the human story. It is arguably the first known work of art on the planet. More than that, it is the first definitive evidence of symbolic thought, of a mind that is creating an external, durable representation of an idea. For the first time, information has been stored outside of a human brain in a way that can survive for the ages. The great silence of the last 200,000 years has been broken by this quiet, deliberate scratch. What does it mean? We will never know. That is part of its immense power and mystery. It could be a representation of a tribal marking. It could be part of a larger mythic story. It could be a simple notation, a way of counting something. It could be nothing more than a doodle, the product of an idle, creative mind experimenting with pattern. But what it means is less important than the fact that it means something. The person who made this was communicating. They were imposing order and meaning onto an object, an act that is at the very foundation of all art, all writing, and all religion. It's the oldest known hashtag, literally a series of hash marks, a symbol that, even to us 75,000 years later, is instantly recognizable as a pattern. And it was not a one-off fluke. Deeper in the same cave, the archaeologists find more. They find dozens of tiny, gray sea snail shells, each one no bigger than a pea. At first, they look unremarkable, but under a microscope, a stunning secret is revealed. Each and every shell has a small, circular hole punched in the exact same spot near the lip. The holes are not natural. They were deliberately made with a fine-tipped bone tool, and the shells show microscopic wear patterns around these holes, the kind of polishing that comes from being strung together on a cord and rubbing against skin or clothing. You are looking at the world's oldest known jewelry. This is a necklace from 75,000 years ago. The significance of this is enormous. Personal adornment, the act of wearing a bead or a pendant, is a profoundly symbolic act. A purely functional human needs no jewelry. A symbolic human uses it to send a message. A string of beads can communicate your identity, your social status, your membership in a particular group. It can be a souvenir from a journey to the coast. It can be a gift that solidifies a bond between two people. It is a way of saying to the world and to yourself, I am an individual. I have a history. I belong. The invention of jewelry is the invention of a new way of being a person. And it means we've been losing one earring for at least 75,000 years. Some things, it seems, truly are timeless. The revelations from Blombos don't stop there. In a layer dated even earlier, to 100,000 years ago, the team finds something else that is utterly astonishing. They find two large abalone shells. Inside each shell is a residue, a dried, hardened substance. When they analyze this residue, they find it is a mixture of crushed red ochre, ground up animal bone, which acts as a binder, and a little bit of charcoal. Lying next to the shells are the tools used to make this concoction. A quartzite grinding stone and a seal shoulder blade that was used as a spatula to mix it all together. You are looking at a 100,000-year-old artist studio. A complete toolkit for mixing complex composite paint. They weren't just using ochre as a dry crayon. They were manufacturing liquid paint, perhaps for decorating their bodies, their clothing, or the walls of their cave. Blombo's cave is a bombshell. It provides undeniable proof that the people who survived the great climate catastrophes had crossed a critical cognitive threshold. They possessed a fully symbolic mind. The hardware and software for being a behaviorally modern human were now clearly in place, and they were being used. But here's the final twist in the story. This was not the great global awakening. Not yet. While the Blombos finds are widely accepted, The debate continues over whether they represent the beginning of a sustained, continuous tradition of symbolic culture, or if they are another, albeit much brighter, flicker of innovation. In the layers of earth deposited in the cave after these symbolic treasures, the symbols disappear again for a long period. It seems this flowering of art and identity may have been a local phenomenon, a brilliant cultural experiment that, for reasons we don't understand, eventually faded out. It was a spark, a single beautiful candle lit in the immense, silent darkness of the Paleolithic. It proved that the fire was possible, but it would still be another 25,000 years of flickering and fading before this spark would finally ignite into the worldwide creative explosion that would forever change our planet. It's 8:57 a.m. on a Friday here in Ho Chi Minh City. We are all surrounded by signals of our identity. The clothes we choose, the logos we display, the style of our hair. It is humbling to think that this fundamental human need to say, "This is me," began in a cave by the sea, with a person stringing a handful of tiny snail shells onto a piece of sinew. The long silence had been broken, and the human mind would never be quiet again. But as we will see, this awakening was not a single event, but a patchy, piecemeal process, and other groups of survivors were on a different, though equally intelligent, path. The small, engraved piece of ochre from Blombo's cave is a stunning, revolutionary spark. It is the first time one of your ancestors speaks to us across the millennia in a language of pure symbol. But the story of our cognitive awakening is not a single, linear narrative. It is not as if one group of people suddenly became modern and then taught everyone else. The reality is far more complex and interesting. The emergence of the modern human mind was a patchy, mosaic process. Different groups of survivors, in their isolated climate refuges, were piecing together different parts of the modern human puzzle. To see another piece of that puzzle, we must travel to another cave on that same South African coast, to a place called Pinnacle Point. Here, the evidence for a different kind of cognitive leap is just as powerful as the art at Blombo's, but it is quieter, more practical, and written not in engravings, but in the rhythm of the tides. You are standing at the entrance to a cave perched on a cliff, looking out over a vast coastal plain. The time is around 164,000 years ago, during another brutal glacial period. The inland of Africa is a cold, inhospitable desert, but here on the coast, life is possible. The sea provides a bounty, but it is a bounty that is not easily won. It requires a new way of thinking, a new level of planning that speaks to a mind that is profoundly modern in its capabilities. As you explore the floor of the cave, you find the familiar debris of daily life. Hearths, stone tools, the bones of hunted animals. But you also find thick, dense layers of something else. The discarded shells of thousands upon thousands of mussels, limpets, and other marine shellfish. The people who lived here were systematically harvesting the sea. They were living on a seafood diet. This may not sound revolutionary, but it is. Harvesting shellfish from a rocky, wave-battered shore is a complex and dangerous task. The richest and most productive tide pools, the areas teeming with the largest and most nutritious shellfish, are only accessible for a very short period of time. They are exposed only during the lowest tides of the month, the spring tides. And spring tides, as you know, are governed by the phases of the moon, occurring only during the full moon and the new moon. To survive and thrive on this resource, you cannot simply wander down to the beach at random and hope for the best. You need a plan. You need a calendar. You need to understand the intricate, invisible connection between that pale disk in the night sky and the behavior of the ocean at your feet. You have to know, weeks in advance, when the tides will be at their lowest. You have to schedule the activities of your entire group around this lunar clock. You must organize everyone to be at the right place at the right time to harvest as much as possible during the short, precious window of opportunity. This is not simple foraging. This is long-term, abstract, logistical planning. The evidence at Pinnacle Point is the earliest definitive proof we have that our ancestors had mastered this complex ecological knowledge. They were not just living in the present. They were living in the future, planning their lives according to a celestial calendar. This is a profound cognitive leap. It is, in its own way, as complex and as abstract as carving a geometric pattern on a piece of ochre. It is the birth of a scientific mind, one that can observe a complex natural cycle, understand its underlying mechanics, and then reorganize its entire society to take advantage of it. Our ancestors, it turns out, invented the tide chart and the all-you-can-eat seafood buffet in the same brilliant stroke 160,000 years ago. This new, reliable food source may have been a game changer. Shellfish are not just calories. They are packed with omega-3 fatty acids, crucial nutrients for brain growth and development. The theory is that this dependable, brain-boosting diet, available even when inland resources failed, is what allowed the small population of humans at Pinnacle Point to survive the climate catastrophe and perhaps even fueled the further evolution of their cognitive abilities. And we see evidence of other advanced technologies here as well. Alongside the shells, you find tiny, meticulously crafted stone blades, some less than an inch long. These are called microliths. They are too small to be used by hand. They were designed to be component parts of a larger weapon system. A row of these sharp, geometric blades would be set into a groove in a wooden or bone shaft, held in place with that resin-based glue we've talked about, to create a fearsome projectile point with multiple, viciously sharp cutting edges. This is, once again, sophisticated composite tool technology, showing a mind that can think in multiple, complex steps. But here's the fascinating contrast. At Pinnacle Point, you have this incredible evidence for a scientific, planning, engineering mind. But what is largely missing is the evidence for a symbolic mind, at least in the way we saw it at Blombos. While they used ochre, they didn't engrave it with abstract patterns. They didn't make shell beads. Their brilliance was turned outward, focused on solving the complex problems of the external, physical world. The relationship between the people of Blombos, with their beautiful spear points and their art, and the people of Pinnacle Point, with their microliths and their lunar calendars, is a key debate. Were they two different cultures meeting at the same coastline? Or were they the same people adapting their tools and their focus to different needs at different times? Whatever the answer, the picture that emerges is clear. Behavioral modernity was not a single package, a switch that was flipped all at once. It was a mosaic. Different pieces of the modern human puzzle were being developed in different places at different times by different groups of our beleaguered ancestors. In one cave, a group takes the first tentative steps into the world of art and personal identity. 100 miles down the coast, another group perfects the science of scheduling and logistics. One is the culture of the artist. The other, the culture of the engineer. It is now 9:01 a.m. on a Friday here in Ho Chi Minh City. We organize our lives around a 7-day week, the human invention. The people of Pinnacle Point organized their lives around the 28-day cycle of the moon, a rhythm of the cosmos. It makes you wonder what crucial, subtle rhythms of the natural world we, in our modern lives, have completely stopped paying attention to. The long, slow journey to becoming us was not a single, heroic march. It was a messy, piecemeal process, a patchwork of brilliant, localized innovations, many of which probably flickered into existence and then vanished, just like the clever technologies we saw before. A key ingredient was still missing, something that would allow these different threads of ingenuity, the artistic, the scientific, the technological, to be woven together into a single, durable, global human culture. But before that could happen, we must look at one more crucial piece of the mosaic: the evidence for the heart of our societies, the compassion and connection that held these tiny groups together, and a startling revelation about who, exactly, was in their family. You have now seen the first sparks of the modern mind, the abstract art of Blombo's cave and the scientific planning of Pinnacle Point. These were brilliant, localized experiments, pieces of a puzzle being solved in different ways by different groups of survivors. But a crucial piece of that puzzle is not about what you could make or what you could plan. It's about who you were. The story of our awakening is also a story about the heart of our societies, about the bonds of compassion that held them together, and a startling revelation about just how big and how surprisingly diverse our ancient family truly was. To understand the strength of your social world, we must travel away from the South African coast, north to the Zagros Mountains of modern-day Iraq. Here, in a large cave called Shanidar, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a group of Neanderthals who lived around 65,000 years ago. And one of them, an individual known as Shanidar I, tells a story more profound than any carved stone. He was an old man for his time, living to be somewhere between 40 and 50 years old. His skeleton is a testament to a life of extreme hardship and pain. Sometime in his youth, he suffered a crushing blow to the left side of his face, which would have shattered his eye socket and almost certainly left him partially or completely blind in that eye. This trauma may have also caused brain damage, affecting the right side of his body. His right arm was withered and useless, with several healed fractures. It appears to have been amputated, or perhaps it just wasted away just above the elbow. To top it all off, he had severe arthritis in his feet and a healed break in one leg that would have made walking an awkward and constantly painful limp. In the brutally unsentimental calculus of survival of the fittest, this individual should have died shortly after his first major injury. He would have been a poor hunter and an ineffective forager. He would have been slow, vulnerable, a liability to a mobile group in a dangerous world. And yet, he lived for decades. He grew old, and there is only one way that is possible. His people cared for him. They fed him when he could not find food for himself. They protected him from predators he could not see or flee from. They helped him move with the group. This is not the behavior of a brutish, unfeeling species. This is evidence of profound compassion, of a complex social structure with deep bonds of empathy and mutual obligation. Shanidar I proves that the capacity to care for the sick, the elderly, and the disabled is not a recent invention of civilized societies. It is an ancient, fundamental part of the human story, a trait we shared with our closest relatives. These people had a no Neanderthal left behind policy. And that brings us to the most revolutionary discovery of all. These Neanderthals, these Denisovans in Asia, they weren't just our neighbors. They were our family. For a long time, the story of Homo Sapiens was told as a story of replacement. We, the smart, clever newcomers, marched out of Africa and swiftly drove our dull-witted, archaic cousins to extinction. It was a clean, simple, and rather self-congratulatory story. And like most simple stories about the past, it has turned out to be completely wrong. The revolution came in the 2010s, when scientists were first able to sequence the full genomes of these ancient peoples from DNA extracted from their fossilized bones. When they compared these ancient genomes to our own, they found the undeniable truth. Our ancestors did not just replace them. They had children with them. The genetic evidence is now clear. If your own ancestry lies outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA in your genome. That is a direct, tangible inheritance from an encounter between a Homo sapiens and a Neanderthal tens of thousands of years ago. If your ancestry is from Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, or parts of Southeast Asia, you may carry up to 5% of your DNA from the Denisovans, another archaic human group we know of almost entirely from their genome, extracted from a single finger bone found in a Siberian cave. Even modern African populations are now known to have traces of DNA from archaic ghost populations they interbred with on their own continent. This is a paradigm shift in our understanding of our own identity. We are all hybrids. The story of our species is a story of intermingling. When your ancestors began to expand out of Africa around 70,000 years ago, they did not enter an empty world. They entered a world that had been populated for hundreds of thousands of years by other kinds of intelligent, successful humans. And they didn't just fight them, they also made love to them. Finding out we have Neanderthal DNA was a big shock for our species' ego. It's like doing one of those ancestry tests and discovering your great-great-great-great-grandma was from a completely different branch of the family tree that everyone had quietly agreed not to talk about. The nature of these interactions between sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans is a topic of intense research and debate. Was it, on the whole, a story of peaceful coexistence and cultural exchange? Was it a story of violent conflict and displacement, with occasional instances of interbreeding? The truth was likely messy and varied, a mix of all of the above depending on the time and place. But the simple fact of the gene flow changes everything. It means these groups were not truly separate biological species, as they could produce fertile offspring. They were just different-looking, culturally distinct populations of the same genus, human. And this intermingling was not just a quirky footnote in our history. It was a key to our success. The genes we borrowed from our archaic cousins were often highly advantageous. Neanderthals and Denisovans had lived outside of Africa for over 300,000 years. Their bodies and immune systems were exquisitely adapted to the local climates, food sources, and pathogens. When your ancestors arrived, they were tropical primates, ill-equipped for the cold winters and unfamiliar diseases of Eurasia. Interbreeding was an evolutionary shortcut. Instead of waiting thousands of years to evolve the necessary adaptations ourselves, we got a genetic starter pack from the locals. The Neanderthal genes we carry today are linked to things like our immune system's ability to fight off certain viruses, and the way our skin and hair adapted to lower levels of UV radiation in northern latitudes. The most famous Denisovan gene, a variant of EPAS1, is found in modern Tibetans and helps their bodies thrive in the low oxygen environment of the high plateau. And the exchange likely went both ways. It wasn't just genes, it was probably ideas. At some late Neanderthal sites in Europe, we find evidence of a tool industry called the Chattelperonian, which includes things like bone tools and simple pendants. Technologies that look suspiciously like they were borrowed from the incoming Homo Sapiens. They saw our new ideas and they copied them, adapted them. This was not a one-way street of us replacing them. It was a complex period of interaction, a time of both gene flow and idea flow. It is 9 a.m. on a Friday here in Ho Chi Minh City. This city, like any great city, is a vibrant mix of people from different backgrounds, a melting pot of genes and cultures. The story in our DNA proves it has always been this way. The secret to our species' success wasn't genetic purity. It was our surprising willingness to mix and match. So, the human family was bigger, more complex, and more compassionate than we ever knew. It was a family that cared for its most vulnerable members for their entire lives. And it was a family that was not afraid to welcome strangers, even strangers from a different branch of the human tree, into its embrace. This understanding utterly transforms our picture of who we are. We are not the product of a single linear ascent. We are the product of a messy, tangled, and beautiful process of coming together. We are not a simple branching tree. We are, as we will see, a braided river. The story of your ancient family is larger and more interconnected than you ever imagined. It's a family defined by deep compassion, capable of caring for its most vulnerable members. And it's a family that opened its arms and its genome to other kinds of humans who shared its world. This new reality requires us to throw out the old maps of our human journey. The simple, elegant tree of life that we have used for over a century to understand our origins is broken. The story of humanity is not the story of a branching tree. It is the story of a braided river. For generations, we were taught the classic out of Africa replacement model, which was a perfect example of a branching tree. In this story, a single trunk, our species, Homo Sapiens, emerged in a single location in Africa. As it grew, it sent out a branch that left the continent and spread across the globe. Along the way, this branch outcompeted all the other older branches on the hominin tree, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, Homo erectus, driving them to extinction. In this model, the other branches are dead ends, evolutionary failures that were pruned away by the success of our own lineage. It was a neat, linear, and satisfyingly triumphant story. But the genetic revolution of the past decade has shattered this clean picture. The undeniable proof that our ancestors interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans means that those other branches were not dead ends at all. They were not pruned from the tree. Instead, their branches grew back into ours, merging and mingling. The tree is the wrong metaphor. It cannot account for this constant coming together. So, you must now picture something else. Imagine a great river flowing across a wide, flat plain. It does not flow in a single, neat channel. The current is constantly splitting, creating multiple, smaller streams that flow in parallel for a time. These streams diverge, meandering across the landscape on their own paths. But further downstream, the land dips and the streams converge again, flowing back into one another, mixing their waters before potentially splitting apart again. This is the Braided River. And this is the new model for human evolution. The different groups we once thought of as separate species, sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others we have yet to properly identify, were not separate branches on a tree. They were the parallel streams in the great flowing river of humanity. Let's look at the main streams that we know of. First, there is the stream that would become us, Homo Sapiens, which was itself a braid of multiple archaic populations flowing and mixing across Africa for hundreds of thousands of years. Then there was the Neanderthal stream. Their lineage and ours diverged from a common ancestor more than 500,000 years ago. Their stream flowed north out of Africa, and they adapted brilliantly to the cold, challenging climates of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia. They were intelligent, skilled tool makers, and, as we saw at Shanidar Cave, capable of deep compassion. In Asia, there was another major channel, the Denisovans. We know almost nothing about what they looked like, as they are known to us almost entirely from a few tiny bone fragments and the powerful story told by their DNA. They were a sister group to the Neanderthals, but genetically distinct, and they populated a vast swath of Asia. And beneath these major streams, there were likely dozens of other smaller channels and rivulets, ghost populations of other archaic humans, like Homo naledi in South Africa, whose DNA may yet be found hiding in our own. For 500,000 years, the river of humanity was a complex delta of these different parallel forms. In 2018, in the Denisova cave in Siberia, the same cave where the first Denisovan fossils were found, archaeologists found the smoking gun that proved this model to be true. They found a tiny fragment of bone. DNA analysis revealed that it belonged to a teenage girl, nicknamed Denny, who had lived around 90,000 years ago. And her genetics were astonishing. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. She was a first-generation hybrid, the direct offspring of two different archaic human groups. The separate streams had converged. The old, clean family tree was replaced with something that looks much more like a tangled plate of spaghetti. This process of interbreeding, which scientists call admixture, was not a rare, one-time event. It happened repeatedly, whenever and wherever these different human populations came into contact. As your sapiens ancestors expanded out of Africa, they met the Neanderthals in the Middle East and Europe. They lived alongside them, perhaps for thousands of years, and they had children together. As other groups of your ancestors moved into Asia, they met and interbred with the Denisovans. The paleoanthropological world is now re-evaluating the very concept of a hominin species. Given that these groups could clearly produce healthy, fertile offspring, many now argue that they should not be seen as separate species at all, but as different subspecies or distinct populations of one highly variable human family. This was not a mistake or a quirky accident. This was a key part of our adaptive strategy. As we saw, the genes we inherited from our archaic cousins gave us a powerful advantage. The Braided River was picking up valuable genetic minerals from the different landscapes it flowed through. Our species motto wasn't conquer and replace. It was arrive, adapt, and co-opt. We took the best genes from the local populations and wove them into our own story. It is pure speculation, but a fascinating thought for a quiet night. Did this genetic mixing also lead to a cognitive mixing? Did the fusion of the Neanderthal brain, with its powerful visual processing, and the Sapiens brain, with its different strengths in social networking and planning, create a new kind of hybrid consciousness? A mind that was greater than the sum of its parts? We are, therefore, a composite species, a hybrid. We are the result of a long, messy, and beautiful history of divergence and convergence. Each of us is a walking testament to this braided past. You are not the descendant of a single, pure lineage that triumphed over all others. You are the descendant of countless streams, a child of the entire, sprawling, interconnected human family. The great river of humanity that flows today is one river, but it is fed by many ancient and diverse sources. It is Friday, August 1st, 2025, just after 9 a.m. We live in a world that is obsessed with categories, with borders, with drawing lines between us and them. Our ancient DNA tells a much older and more truthful story. It tells us that the lines have always been blurry, and that our greatest strength has always been our ability to merge, to mix, and to flow together. This new understanding of ourselves as a deeply interconnected, hybrid species is the final piece of the puzzle. We now have all the elements in place. We understand the long period of technological competence but symbolic silence. We understand the demographic trap of the leaky cultural bucket. We understand the relentless pressure of a volatile climate. We have seen the first flickering sparks of art and scientific planning. And we have seen that our family tree is not a tree at all. We are now standing at the threshold of 50,000 years ago. We are finally ready to ask the great question: what happened next? Why, after 200,000 years of running in place, did all these streams of innovation and biology finally converge and create a cultural tidal wave that would change the world forever? You are now standing at the end of a long and winding road, a story that has been shaped by the slow, messy braiding of our ancestry, by the brilliant flicker of lonely innovations, and by the relentless cycles of a cruel climate. You have seen the first sparks of art and the deep roots of our compassion. You understand that your family tree is a tangled, beautiful web that includes other kinds of humans. You have all the pieces of the puzzle. Now, it is time to put them together. We have arrived at the threshold of 50,000 years ago. We are finally ready to answer the great question: what happened? Why, after a silence that lasted for 200,000 years, did the human mind suddenly catch fire and illuminate the entire world? The change is not gradual. It is an explosion. Suddenly, all across the globe, the world of your ancestors is flooded with symbols. It is a creative outpouring on a scale that is utterly unprecedented. You travel to the island of Sulawesi in Indonesia, and in a cave there, you see a hand stencil made some 40,000 years ago by someone pressing their hand against the rock and spraying red ochre over it, a ghostly signature that says, "I was here." You journey to Europe and descend into the breathtaking gallery of Chauvet Cave in France. Here, 36,000 years ago, master artists used charcoal and ochre to paint a dynamic, stunningly realistic menagerie of lions, rhinos, and mammoths that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight. This is not a local flicker like the one we saw at Blombo's. This is a global phenomenon. Personal adornment becomes common everywhere. In the Denisova cave in Siberia, someone drills a tiny hole through a beautiful dark green chlorite bracelet, polishing it to a high sheen. In the Sungir burial site, near modern-day Moscow, Two children are laid to rest some 34,000 years ago, their bodies covered in more than 10,000 meticulously carved mammoth ivory beads, alongside straightened mammoth tusks that form great spears. This is not just burial. This is a profound statement about status, about belief in an afterlife, about a world saturated with symbolic meaning. And you see the first true sculptures, the famous Venus figurines appear with their exaggerated female features, perhaps symbols of fertility or a mother goddess. And most astonishing of all, from a cave in Germany, you find the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Städel, carved from mammoth ivory 40,000 years ago. It is a masterpiece of the human imagination, a figure with the body of a man and the head of a cave lion. This is not a depiction of something seen in the real world. This is a depiction of an idea, a spirit, a god. It is definitive proof of a mind that can conceive of and represent a mythical reality. The Great Awakening has begun. So, what was the switch that was flipped? What was the final ingredient that was added to the human recipe? The answer is not a sudden, magical mutation in our brains. We have seen that the cognitive capacity for art and planning was there tens of thousands of years earlier. The answer is much simpler and much more profound. It was a numbers game. The solution to the sapient paradox was demography. This is the cultural threshold effect. Think of it like this. Culture is information, and information needs a network to survive and grow. For 200,000 years, that network was too small and too fragmented. The leaky bucket of culture, kicked over by a volatile climate, could never fill up. But starting around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, something began to change. Perhaps the climate finally stabilized enough. Perhaps the genetic adaptations we gained from interbreeding made us more resilient. For whatever reason, the human population began a slow but steady period of growth. The isolated streams of the Braided River began to flow into a larger, more interconnected sea of humanity. And once the population density in a region reached a critical tipping point, a threshold was crossed. Suddenly, the network of minds was large enough and connected enough to act as a reliable hard drive for cultural information. The mathematics of innovation versus loss finally tipped in our favor. Now, when a brilliant individual invents a new technique, there are enough other people around to learn it, to master it, and to pass it on. The idea is no longer quarantined in a single, isolated band. It can now spread through a network of exchange from one group to the next. The rate at which new ideas were being generated finally began to exceed the rate at which old ideas were being lost. The bucket was no longer leaking faster than it was being filled. It was beginning to overflow. This is the birth of true cumulative culture. It's a ratchet effect. An invention is made, a new kind of fish hook, a better way to make rope, and it is retained by the collective memory of the population. The ratchet clicks forward one notch. The next generation doesn't have to reinvent the fish hook. They are born into a world where it already exists. They can learn the existing design, and then maybe one of them will figure out how to improve it, adding a barb. Click. The ratchet moves forward another notch. It can now never slip back to where it was before. This is the secret to our species' success. We are not necessarily smarter as individuals than our ancestors of 100,000 years ago. But we are the beneficiaries of an immense, ever-growing inheritance of accumulated knowledge. We stand on their shoulders, and the external symbols, the art, the beads, the figurines, were the very engine of this new cumulative process. A painting on a cave wall, an engraved pattern, a string of beads. These are forms of externalized memory. They are ways of storing information outside of the fragile, mortal human brain. They give ideas a permanence and a transmissibility they never had before. The story of the Lion Man is no longer dependent on an elder who might die. It is now carved in ivory, a durable piece of information that can be seen and understood by many across generations. The Great Symbolic Awakening was not just a symptom of the new population density. It was the very mechanism that allowed that new density to fuel an exponential explosion of culture. So, this is what really happened around 50,000 years ago. It was the moment our species finally solved its networking problem. It was the moment our social world became dense enough to function as a collective superbrain, one capable of remembering everything and building upon it endlessly. The secret to unlocking humanity's potential wasn't a mysterious monolith or a spark of divine intervention. It was simply the profound, world-altering power of having enough neighbors. It is the ultimate power of friendship story, just with more mammoths and better cave art. It is now 9:05 a.m. on Friday, August 1st, 2025, here in Ho Chi Minh City. I am connected to billions of other human minds through a digital network of almost unimaginable density. This is the ultimate expression of the principle that was unlocked 50,000 years ago, that a network of connected minds, sharing and building upon ideas, is the most powerful force on this planet. It was this discovery that finally allowed us to step off the treadmill of survival and begin the exponential journey that has led, in a dizzying sprint of time, to agriculture, to cities, to spaceships, and to this very story being told tonight. And now, our long journey across 250,000 years of human history comes to its final, quiet close. The epic story of our species, the long silence, the flickering sparks of genius, the great awakening, can all begin to soften and fade into the background. The immense timescales and complex ideas can be released, leaving your mind clear and calm. There are no more mysteries to solve tonight, no more thresholds to cross. There is only the simple, peaceful reality of this present moment. Feel the weight of your body, comfortable and supported. Become aware of the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, a slow and steady tide that pulls you further and further away from the waking world. Let the soft, ambient sound in your room, the hum of the fan, the distant whisper of the city, become a soothing lullaby, washing over you, cleansing your mind of thought. You have traveled far, and now you have returned to the safe harbor of your own bed, your own quiet space. All that is left to do is let go. Allow yourself to drift on that slow, easy tide of breath into the deep, restorative, and dreamless peace that is waiting for you. End of script. Sweet dreams.